The mountain didn't simply split apart. In an instant, it disappeared into a column of white heat. Buried deep inside the jagged limestone along the Strait of Hormuz, a hidden command complex described as one of the regime's most critical strategic hubs was gone before the first warning could fully register. No radar dishes turning in panic, no hurried interceptor launches. The S-300 batteries remained silent, their screens locked in a frozen digital stare. 4 decades of secrecy and massive investment were reduced to dust in just 94 seconds. Opposing commanders often make the same miscalculation. They build vast barriers of steel and concrete, convinced that depth alone guarantees safety. They believed the Gulf Fortress was untouchable, a final answer to American naval power. But while Iranian crews were still aligning optics and preparing systems, the strike had already passed straight through the top of that defense. Many observers misunderstood what made the operation so effective. They searched for the aircraft. They searched for the visible power. They found almost nothing. But a new reality now defines the strait. If you move, you can be tracked. If you can be tracked, you can be hit. And in those 94 seconds, American and Israeli forces demonstrated that even the strongest fortress no longer has a true ceiling. To understand why that command center was lost while its defenders were still beginning their day, you have to look 22,000 meters above the clouds. While Iranian crews were fueling missiles inside what they believed were hidden underground sites, a silent observer was already following the thermal rhythm of those engines. This is the new high ground. Since its creation in 2019, the U.S. Space Force has represented more than a new military branch. It represents constant infrared awareness on a global scale. The United States has deployed a network of satellites equipped with infrared sensors so sensitive they can detect an extraordinarily small heat source from roughly 240 miles away. For perspective, that is about the distance from New York City to Washington, D.C. Imagine standing at the Lincoln Memorial and spotting a single match being lit in Times Square. The moment an Iranian crew began preparing a ballistic missile for launch, that activity appeared as a bright and unmistakable signal on a high-definition screen inside a secure operations room far away in the American heartland. That information moves at light speed. It flows into the large white radomes scattered across American and Allied territory, where it is processed by computers operating in nanoseconds. Within moments of a heat signature appearing, a target solution is formed, and coordinates are sent to a weapons platform thousands of miles away. The target is being tracked before the launch crew has even finished its checklist. While satellites provide the view from space, U.S. Cyber Command and Israel's joint cyber units are already working inside the enemy's networks, disrupting the links that let the system function. General Dan Kane has described this as layering non-kinetic effects. The purpose is not to physically destroy equipment at the outset. The purpose is to prevent that equipment from communicating. At the center of Iran's air defense architecture is the Mirage 4 radar system, which Tehran has promoted as being more advanced than older Russian platforms. On paper, it is formidable, capable of scanning out to 240 miles, roughly the distance from London to Paris. But in practice, that radar can be fed false returns and misleading signals. Radar works like a massive pulse sent into the environment. Every time it broadcasts to search for threats, it also reveals itself. So the radars continue spinning, the cooling fans continue humming, but the picture they display no longer reflects the sky as it truly is. One battery commander sees calm, empty airspace. Another, only a few miles away, sees a screen crowded with hundreds of phantom targets. The system is active, but its understanding of reality has been distorted. At 1:30 a.m., the physical phase begins. But not in the way the IRGC expected. From the bomb bays of B-52 Stratofortress aircraft operating in international airspace, waves of ADM-160 MALD decoys are released into the darkness. These lightweight flying decoys are designed to provoke a response. Each one carries a signature augmentation system that imitates the radar profile of larger combat aircraft such as a B-1B Lancer or an F-15E Strike Eagle. To Iranian operators, it appears that a large multi-axis American air raid is approaching their most protected zone. Their doctrine offers only one answer to that kind of threat: respond at full scale. And that is exactly what happens. Missiles are launched from bunkers. Interceptors are spent rapidly. A single defensive missile costs the regime millions to build, while each decoy costs a tiny fraction of that amount. Over the next half hour, years of carefully built defensive inventory are consumed trying to stop decoys made from relatively inexpensive materials and electronics. Every interceptor fired is one less available when the real strike package arrives. More importantly, every launch exposes the firing position. It is the central dilemma of modern air defense. The act of defending yourself can also reveal exactly where you are. Once the system begins transmitting and launching, the trap is fully in motion. That is where the coordination between the United States and Israel becomes especially significant. The satellite data from high above is pushed simultaneously to an Israeli F-35 and to the Combat Information Center of an American Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating in the Gulf. While Iranian commanders are reaching for communications gear to issue orders, those communications channels are already being disrupted. Before the first American or Israeli strike weapon is released, malicious code and electronic interference have already moved through the enemy's own lines. The logic is brutal in its simplicity. If the Iranian commander turns radar on, he becomes highly visible to anti-radiation weapons that can home in on the signal within moments. If he turns it off, he loses visibility and remains vulnerable to precision cruise missiles that already know where the bunker is located. Either choice leads to the same result. There is no comfortable option and no reliable escape. In this environment, the United States and Israel function less like two separate forces and more like a single integrated system. The F-35 acts like a quarterback in the sky, assigning priorities, identifying openings in the defense, and helping remove bottlenecks in real time. It is a precision instrument guided by layers of support that remain largely invisible. But one major question remains. How do you identify the real target in a field of thousands of decoys? How do you know which truck is carrying a ballistic missile and which one is only plywood, paint, and heat lamps? That is where Project Maven enters the picture. This is AI-enabled warfare at its most efficient. The US military has used artificial intelligence tools from companies such as Palantir and Anthropic to process enormous volumes of sensor data in real time. In a more traditional conflict, human analysts might spend days comparing satellite images, searching for movement patterns, heat signatures, or logistical clues. By then, the launcher has moved and the opportunity is gone. An algorithm can do the same work in seconds. It filters out noise, ignores crude decoys that lack the thermal mass of a real engine, and isolates the underground nodes where the regime is hiding its most valuable systems. Even when Iranian units move during the night and in the middle of sandstorms, believing the weather gives them cover, the sensors above can still monitor the environment. AI can then calculate variables such as wind drift for precision-guided munitions before the pilot even reaches the release point. As the campaign continued, Iranian strategy shifted dramatically. What began as saturation turned into isolation. The change reflected not just battlefield losses, but the internal collapse of a defensive concept. On the opening day of Operation Epic Fury, the regime launched a large wave of ballistic missiles and drones, hoping sheer volume would produce results. By day 15, that surge had shrunk to a fraction of its original size. Each time a launcher moved into the open, the coordinates were already being passed through the system. Before stabilizers on the vehicle could even settle, a standoff weapon from a US Navy F/A-18 Super Hornet was already on the way. Iran spent years and vast sums building a missile arsenal believed to exceed 2,000 units, calculating that the cost of intervention would become too high for Washington to accept. But the exchange ratio moved in the opposite direction. Expensive ballistic missiles were being intercepted far from their targets, while launch infrastructure worth billions was being removed with comparatively low-cost precision bombs. It was a contest not only of spending, but of planning. The United States and its partners invest heavily to keep the sea lanes open and to ensure the Strait of Hormuz remains a corridor for global trade, not a pressure point controlled by coercion. In that sense, the technology is not just about military reach. It is about maintaining stability through overwhelming capability. The combined US-Israeli effort reportedly dismantled around 80% of Iran's air defense network, with much of that damage occurring in the first 24 hours. And it was not done through old-style mass bombing. Much of it came from the quiet combination of orbital surveillance, cyber operations, and tightly coordinated precision strikes. Iran brought a 20th century defensive mindset into a 21st century space-linked battlefield. And by the time that gap became clear, it was already too late. So what remains of the so-called Forbidden Fortress of Hormuz? It now stands as a symbol of an outdated philosophy. The integrated US-Israeli kill web has shown that in the modern era, truly hidden targets are disappearing. The Iranian regime is left scanning a sky it no longer controls, searching for threats it cannot fully detect, and waiting for strikes it cannot reliably stop. Its own version of a space command, the center of its long-range strategic thinking, was reportedly dismantled by March 5th. Its operational satellites, including several tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have been reduced in practical terms to little more than expensive metal drifting in orbit. Without reliable eyes, the system is left reacting blindly, while the US Navy and the IDF operate with methodical precision. This was not the kind of conflict Tehran prepared for. It expected mass formations, visible buildups, and conventional patterns. It was not ready for a coordinated, space-linked targeting chain working faster than human decision-making. And that is what makes the cost-benefit calculation so striking. In the span of a few weeks, integrated operations neutralized a regional threat that had taken decades to build. The larger lesson is clear. Sequence now matters as much as firepower, and in many cases more. The Space Force provided the vision. Artificial intelligence provided the focus. The US Navy and the IDF delivered the strike. Together, they turned what looked like an untouchable wall into rubble. For the Iranian regime, it became a strategic disaster that erased decades of investment and removed assets that could not easily be replaced. They placed their future on a fortress that turned out to have no roof. And in just 94 seconds, everything changed.